Welcome to our workshop on Islamophobia Awareness, hosted by Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services and funded by Heritage Canada. In this workshop, we will explore the intersection of religious discrimination and DEI initiatives in our communities and workplaces. To start off, we're going to take a look at our agenda for today's workshop. So we're going to first develop an understanding of what Islamophobia is and how it's connected to the DEI framework. Then we're going to look at DEI gaps and failures. We're going to also explore some media stereotypes that often shape or promote Islamophobia. We'll tie it in with some real-world experiences and really see how Islamophobia and its impacts are present in the community. And then lastly, we'll learn how to support and create inclusive environments so that hopefully we can really stand up and fight against Islamophobia. Our goals for today's workshops are to really have you deepen your knowledge of Islamophobia's roots, manifestations, and societal impacts. We're also hoping that you're able to recognize how existing DEI frameworks often overlook religious diversity and fail to address Islamophobia effectively. Another goal is to really equip you with debunking common stereotypes and media misrepresentations of Muslim identity, and finally to provide you with practical strategies to really support Muslim communities and foster inclusive environments. To start off, it's really important to understand what Islamophobia is. Islamophobia is prejudice, discrimination, or hostility directed towards Muslims or those that look like they are Muslim. It can look like fear, hatred, or bias that's really based on religious identity and is often connected with racial and cultural stereotypes. So this way of discrimination really creates blocks in education, employment, public spaces, and it truly affects millions of people daily. So how does Islamophobia connect to DEI? So by understanding that DEI aims to create inclusive spaces, we can see how it really overlooks, religion and the considerations it has. When religion is ignored, Muslim identities often stay unprotected in DEI frameworks. So it's important to understand that Islamophobia is both religious and racial discrimination. It really intersects with race, gender, and immigration status, and that effective DEI must include anti-Islamophobia education. Additionally, religious accommodation is essential for true inclusion, and this is often an area that we see lacking, whether in different spaces, whether it's workspaces or education spaces. So really, Islamophobia and DEI connect, as without full frameworks of DEI that take religion into account, Islamophobia manifests. So I would like to expand on how DEI initiatives really fail on addressing Islamophobia. So, for instance, Islamophobia is often treated as a secondary concern rather than a core DEI issue, even though we've explored how it intersects with, immigration status, with race, with gender, a lot of those. And it's often an ignored intersectionality, just as I've kind of mentioned. So, especially for Muslim women, for immigrants, Black Muslims, they often face layered harms, and this is not really addressed in DEI. There's also, unfortunately, poor reporting mechanisms for Islamophobic incidents, and unfortunately as well, there is a lack of Muslim-led perspectives on campuses and workplace trainings, as we can see that, religion and understanding Muslim individuals is often not seen in the DEI framework, which is what we're hoping to raise awareness on and in turn address Islamophobia that's happening. So a lot of DEI programs rarely include spiritual and religious diversity models, and there's a critical need for stronger accountability, clear consequences for bias, institutional statements, and resource investments to really address these gaps. So now that we've really developed an understanding of how religion, specifically Islam, and the needs of Muslim individuals is often lacking from the DEI framework, some of the workplace challenges that are faced by Muslim professionals at work is those subtle exclusions, even though there are DEI efforts at organizations or institutions. There is often also, again, religion missing from those workplace strategies, so really understanding that maybe for Ramadan or prayer times there are some accommodation that's needed, even something as inclusion of halal food, or understanding that different individuals have different standards of modesty. These are all needs that are often overlooked in workspaces. And with understanding the challenges, what's needed is that we are creating systems for confidential reporting channels for religious bias. Additionally, we need Muslim-led perspectives in leadership training to really provide that first-hand experience. And we really need genuine religious inclusion in DEI frameworks. So we have a quote here that says, "Intersectionality matters. Race, gender, and immigration status shape workplace barriers for Muslim professionals, especially as those add more layers of barriers and challenges that they face. And often, as we saw with Islamophobia, it can impact you even though if you're not Muslim, just because it is often the perception that people have that Muslims look a certain way. So if you're similar to that, it will impact you even though you're not belonging to the faith." So we're going to look at more of how DEI really is silent on religious diversity. So the current focus is for DEI frameworks, race and gender, but they're often ignoring religion. There's also missing elements to this DEI framework, which is that religious diversity is absent in faculty hiring, in training, and policy development. Another aspect is that there's incomplete inclusion, so really looking at how there's a lack of accommodation for religious holidays, practices, and this is just all partial efforts, not full inclusion as we are hoping and pushing for with a DEI framework. And the path forward is to really integrate religious identity in all DEI planning and revise tools for religious equity. So faith is core to cultural identity and belonging. By ignoring religion in DEI frameworks, we're creating incomplete inclusion efforts that really fail to serve entire communities, which is why it's so essential that we're understanding Islamophobia and seeing the gaps in DEI so we're able to better address them and in turn, as I've mentioned before, decrease Islamophobia by providing knowledge and accommodations to those that need it. It's important that we're recognizing stereotypes that are shaped by media. There are many stereotypes that we can see in movies, TVs, in stories, but these are often some of the most common ones, so that there's, for instance, an over-association of Islamic terrorism, which in turn does hurt Muslim individuals, as we've seen. Another misconception is, or stereotype that is shaped by media, is that Muslim women are oppressed, and this can be due to family or due to wearing the hijab. So a lot of these are biases that we hold at times. And the third is that there is this assumption that Muslims don't integrate or anti-Western, even though we have various communities integrating and really making different countries their own and creating a very beautiful pot of different cultures and communities and all. Another stereotype that is often shaped by media is that Islam is inherently sexist just because of how there is a lack of understanding on a lot of aspects, and this leads to seeing it as one way. Another stereotype that we see a lot also is that all Muslims are Arab, even though there's large Muslim populations all over the world. And last is that Muslim men are controlling or angry, and we see various depictions of this in, again, TV shows, in movies, and these are all adding to the Islamophobia faced by different individuals, but also not really understanding how different individuals or Muslim communities really live well. And by not understanding or calling out these stereotypes, we're only adding to the misassumptions and increasing the Islamophobia that is already existing and happening. So now that we've talked about kind of some of the misunderstandings or stereotypes, the reality of Muslim identity is really large but simple at the same time. So for instance, there are so many diverse expressions. Muslim identity, individuals often have different cultural practices and personal choices. There's no one way to religion, and we see that in all the different Muslim people practicing. There's also a global community to this, so coming against that stereotypes that all Muslims are Arab. It really shows that, Muslims represent all ethnicities, nationalities, and backgrounds. And the reality, again, is individual agency. So personal faith journeys and choices really reflect autonomy and diversity. We have this understanding of taking your own path, or everyone is really entitled to practice the way they want to practice, even though media shapes it in a different way. So by understanding this reality and understanding the diversity that exists, we're really combating those stereotypes presented by media and are perpetuated in different societies. So these are some of the cultural challenges faced by Muslims. The first is navigating tension. So Muslim mothers experience tension navigating, pro to LGBT school content. EDI frameworks aim for inclusion but may unintentionally exclude religious minorities. Mothers often feel spoken about, not heard, which leaves their voices absent in DEI planning. The challenge is that inclusion becomes selective. So we support one minority while marginalizing another. Curriculum and policy changes shape daily experiences for Muslim families. This highlights the need for deeper, equitable approaches respecting all minority identities, especially we say that, Islam removes autonomy and is very controlling, when oftentimes in society we're not giving that same autonomy to how different Muslim families and individuals want to practice their own faith. So it's really important that we're recognizing there is some challenges in how a lot of families and individuals are navigating spaces. So being aware of that, we can provide different solutions and see how to best support everyone. As we've recognized that intersectionality is a core aspect of DEI, it's really important that we're also mentioning Black Muslims and having these conversations, as often they face added layers of challenges and barriers. So for instance, only 25.8% of Black Muslims own homes, and this is compared to 75% of the population. Again, oftentimes, Black Muslims face twice the discrimination because it's anti-Black racism and then Islamophobia. So we really need to understand how sectionality plays a key role in Islamophobia and how it appears different for different people. So Black Muslims, as we've said, face lower educational attainment and income disparities. Youth and women experience compound vulnerabilities. The majority are immigrants or first generation, concentrated in Ontario and Quebec, and this really calls for intersectional, data-driven policy reform and community-led Black Muslim organizations. Now that we've developed an understanding of Islamophobia, it's important to also discuss different forms of harassment, as that is often a byproduct of Islamophobia. So Islamophobia harassment in public places, it really refers to discriminatory behaviors and hostility that is directed towards individuals based on their faith or perceived Muslim identity. And this can be in various forms. It includes verbal abuse, which is insults, slurs, or derogatory comments. There's also physical aggression, unfortunately, where it's like acts of violence or intimidation towards someone of their belief. There's also vandalism, where individuals, damage property associated with Islamic symbols or places of worship. There's also exclusion, which is social isolation or avoidance based on religious identity. So for Islamophobia in schools, it refers to the prejudice, discrimination, or hostility that's directed towards students based on their Islamic faith or cultural background, and this can manifest in various forms as well. So similar to public places, there's also verbal harassment, social exclusion. There's also stereotyping and bullying, which is really when we're not being cognizant of the stereotypes and the biases that influence the decisions that we make. And oftentimes there are various students that face physical or emotional abuse because they identify as Muslim. Another form of harassment can happen in workplaces where there's still that same aspect of discrimination, prejudice, or hostility because of Islamic faith or cultural background, and similar to other areas, it can manifest as verbal harassment. There's also unequal treatment, which is where disparities in promotions, assignments, or job opportunities. And there's often also negative stereotyping, where we assume negative traits or behaviors based on religious beliefs. So after we've explored some different forms of harassment, we wanted to also share some incidents from the news that really showcase how harassment publicly happens often to, Muslim individuals or those perceived to be Muslim. So the National Council of Canadian Muslims reports a dramatic rise in Islamophobia in the GTA region. Additionally, on March 15, 2025, Canadian officials and Muslim community leaders held a news conference stating that, from harassment to hateful words online, the rise in hostility against Muslims is unacceptable and must be addressed. As we know of these incidents, unfortunately as well, on April 5 and 7 in 2023, a man allegedly drove into two mosque parking lots in the GTA and then verbally abused Muslim shoppers at a mall, shouting anti-Muslim comments. So there are often a lot of cases, whether it's the mosque shootings or different incidents, Islamophobia is a big consideration that really has to be addressed because the impacts are devastating and impact everyday people and their lives. So it's really important to recognize that harassment can also escalate to violence. Harassment alone is already harmful, but without awareness, the harm does not end there. The progression from harassment to hate crimes represents a dangerous escalation. Without proper awareness, intervention, and accountability, hostile environments can lead to physical violence, property damage, and threats that endanger Muslim communities. So these are also some statistics of hate crimes, as we talked about, of how harassment is escalating to violence. So the Toronto police confirmed that hate crimes increased by approximately 93% since October 2023 compared to the previous years. We also have documented incidents as mentioned previously. So on August 31, there was a hate-motivated incident at an Islamic center in Mississauga where children stopped attending evening classes out of fear. On April 6, there was an intruder at Markham Mosque that threatened to return with a gun. On July 4th, a young woman in Oshawa was attacked at her workplace and had her hijab removed. And then in late 2024, a Muslim man in Markham was violently assaulted in hate-motivated attacks. So these really note a dramatic increase in Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian hate crimes in Canada, including the GTA, especially after October 7th, 2023. So after exploring all the violent incidents, there's often leadership responses that just note of how Islamophobia is present but also fail to address it. So as you can see here, both Mark Carney and Doug Ford have released statements on incidents that have happened, claiming that there's no space for Islamophobia in our Canadian community, but they're not really including policy changes, resource allocations, and systematic reforms to really protect Muslim communities. A lot of the times, their words often fall short if there's no action attached to it. So how can we support Muslim communities? The first is that we can educate ourselves, so learning about Islam, Muslim cultures, and realities of Islamophobia, as we've done in this workshop. And it's really important that we speak up and challenge Islamophobic comments, jokes, and stereotypes when we encounter them. Just as important, we must amplify voices. So, for example, center Muslim perspectives in DI conversations and decision makings, and also advocate for policy change and reform to allow for religious accommodations, increase reporting systems, and accountability measures for when incidents do happen. So building inclusive workspace starts by assessing current gaps. So we have to audit DI programs for religious inclusion. And then it moves into including Muslim voices, as those are the ones that often know what they need best. So if we want to ensure that we're providing what Muslims need and what individuals need, we have to go to them and really hear from them. It's also important that we're accommodating faith, so providing prayer spaces, flexible scheduling, and dietary options. And last but not least is to create safety and really establish confidential reporting and clear consequences. True workplace inclusion requires intentional effort to address religious discriminations, and organizations must move beyond performative DEI statements to implement meaningful structural changes that protect and support Muslim employees. So as we come to an end, it's really important, and we're hoping that one of the takeaways is that solidarity matters. So building bridges between communities really strengthens everyone. When we stand together against Islamophobia, we create safer, more inclusive spaces for all marginalized groups. And that collective action requires allyship and to continue to listen to Muslim voices, educate ourselves and others, but also advocate for systematic change. True diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot exist when any religious community is excluded or targeted. We must work together to dismantle Islamophobia and build genuinely welcoming environments. Thank you for listening to our workshop today, and we're really hoping, again, another takeaway I would say is that together we can stop Islamophobia. So by understanding Islamophobia, challenging stereotypes, supporting Muslim voices, and advocating for systematic change, we can really build a society where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected regardless of their faith. We are hoping that you found today's workshop informative, and if you have any questions, please reach out to us at Muslim Children's Aid and Support Services, and we can support in so many different ways. So ensure that you are asking questions, learning, reading, and we're hoping that this has caused some change or pushed for some change today, and thank you again for listening.